Through the generosity of Mowat, one of the founders of Plain, we have been able to establish what will be a regular award, which we, the Board of Directors of Plain, have named the Mowat Award for Outstanding Achievement in Plain Language. This is the first time we will be presenting the award, but it will be awarded regularly if we find people who can meet the same standard of outstanding achievement that this first recipient has set. And it is indeed a very high standard. First, I and the Board of Directors would like to thank Christine for establishing this award through a generous grant. The first winner of the award, and I'm going to horribly mispronounce her name, and I've already apologized for that, is Barbro Ehrenberg-Sundin. Now, I want to explain something. You hold this up. You will see a picture here. That is a picture of the actual award, which will be engraved with her name, the date, and everything else. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it made in time for this year's award, since it's the very first time. But we will be presenting that to her later. It is a crystal award that, as I said, will be engraved with her name, the date, and the name of the award. Now, I just want to briefly, I'm sure the people of Sweden know the outstanding accomplishments very well, but I want to just do a few of the highlights, and I emphasize just a few of the highlights of the achievement of this remarkable professional. She's been a language expert in the Swedish government offices for 27 years, and she retired, I use that word loosely, in 2007. In 1993, she was involved in founding the Plain Language Group, which was appointed by the government to encourage state authorities all over Sweden to start plain language projects. The group is still doing important work for the Language Council of Sweden. In 2001, she played a major part in establishing plain language in the EU, a network to improve the quality of the language in EU documents. Her work in the network has affected how EU documents are translated and implemented not only in Sweden, but in all of Europe. When Sweden was the host country for the European Union in 2001 and held the European Law Conference, she organized a session on the need for clarity and public access. And she found time to mentor the Plain Language program in Mexico. Although she is now retired, she continues her work in plain language. She is a member of the Swedish Committee for Plain Language Issues, and she recently took part in an executive investigation about citizens' faith in the courts. And she teaches courses on how to write plain statutes. Congratulations.
They have called me the plain language grand old lady for many years now. Looking back at my more than 30 years long plain language career, so many things have happened. And on this occasion, there are only a few things I would like to mention. I have been promised 10 minutes. The very first time I got to know about English-speaking countries' efforts to make government's texts more reader-friendly was in 1980, when I visited the Document Design Center in Washington, D.C. The research being done at the center convinced me that plain language had to embrace all textual components and not only language as such. In spite of the fact that long and complex sentences and archaic vocabulary was a huge problem at that time in Swedish official style, I wanted to tackle more. I wanted to meet the reader's need in every aspect: content, structure, design, and language. So the 1980s became a time of reforming important documents in the ministries where I was employed as a language expert. And instead of telling a story in a chronological order, which was the traditional outline of most governmental texts at that time, the drafters in the ministries were taught to focus on the result, the proposals or the decisions of the government, and to argue for that result. And summaries and informative headings and information broken down into manageable parts were also an important part of that text reform. This was pioneer work at that time, more or less based on intuition, because the first Swedish language consultancy program, which I followed from 1978 to 1980, had focused mostly on syntax and wording, and research in text linguistics or discourse analysis was still in its infancy. The second time I got to know more about what was happening in the plain language world outside Sweden was in the mid-80s, when a very nice man visited us in the government offices. He had come all the way from Sydney, Australia, and started to make inquiries about our work. Professor Robert Eagleson, whom most of you know, came as if from heaven. I immediately fell in love with him, professionally, of course. And we soon realized that the way we were modernizing legislation was very much the same. Without knowing of each other, we had met the same problems and used the same tools to make legislation easier to read. Just marvelous. He in the southern hemisphere among kangaroos, and I up here among bears. And from then on we started to change letters and guidelines by ordinary post, of course. Not even the fax machine was invented at that time. Just think of that. Thanks to Robert, I gradually got to know other plain language pioneers around the world, and I'm happy to see some of you here today: Joe Kimball, Martin Katz, Nicole Fenbach, Bill Lutz, and Chris Barford. Is that an interview? Yes. And later on in the 90s, I had the opportunity to attend international conferences and brag about the Swedish plain language work. Among others, I attended the first plain conference in 1995 in Winnipeg, Canada. And I remember how people were envious and astonished by the fact that the Swedish government had its own language experts at the very top of the law-making machinery. Well, we are privileged in Sweden, having had support from the government for more than 40 years now for plain language work. And I have been involved in most of the activities emanating from that source that Bill was telling you, the Swedish Plain Language Group, the EU Language Service, and I was also involved in the reorganization of the Swedish Language Council into a government authority, and in the drafting of the bill, proposing this, and at last the Swedish Language Act that you have heard about at this conference. And after my retirement, I got the ultimate challenge, and that was to convince judges to change their drafting habits. so that those involved in the case might have a chance to understand the court's decision, and especially the reasons behind it. I became a member of a government commission which, among other things, was to propose how court decisions could be drafted in a more user-friendly way. And so we did. So, during the last 3 years, I've been lecturing at most of the high courts in Sweden, trying to convince hundreds of reluctant judges. This ultimate fight for introducing plain language into the courts has been at times provocative, but also successful. The judicial document that received the Plain Language Crystal Award last year, it even has summaries, informative headings, and table charts. That's a progress for judgments. I'm glad to say that the attitudes of the Swedish judiciary are rapidly changing, and I feel really happy about the outcome of my lecture so far. The courts are now committed to make plans for enhancing the quality of communication between the courts and citizens, and more research about the drafting of judgments will follow. Promoting plain language is a never-ending task, and I know that there are many competent young plain language consultants ready to step into my shoes. I don't have to worry. The mission will continue. And even more successfully, I think, if we agree on a precise definition of plain language, if we get more research about plain language, and if we deepen collaboration between plain language practitioners around the world. Thank you once more for this prestigious international award. For me, it's the crowning glory of many years devoted and persistent fight for clarity.
Well, that wraps it up. The conference now is semi-officially over, because I certainly hope you will all show up for the dinner this evening. If you didn't notice in your packet, there is a notice that if you want to walk from the hotel to there, you can gather in the lobby at 6:50 p.m. and walk as a group. Otherwise, you can use the map and find your own way. The directions are in plain language, so there should be no problems. And I want to thank all of you for an outstanding conference. All of the speakers, all the people who attended. And I always find the most valuable thing for me at the conference are the breaks. Because that's when you get to talk to everyone and meet new people and meet new ideas. Thank you, and I hope we will see you at the next Plain Conference, which has not yet been scheduled, but as soon as it is, we will announce it. Thank you.